$65 billion. That's more than the GDP of most countries, more than the annual revenue of Nike, Starbucks, and Netflix combined. And one man stole all of it. Not with a gun, not with a hack, not with an army, with a piece of paper and a very boring conversation. For 30 years, Bernard Madoff ran the largest investment fraud in the history of human civilization. 30 years. And the most terrifying part? The people he stole from weren't naive. They weren't desperate. They were sophisticated investors, hedge funds, banks, charities, billionaires, people who did this for a living, people who were supposed to know better. They didn't stand a chance. And neither would you. Welcome to Anatomy of a Lie. This is the story of the man who made the biggest theft in history look like the most boring thing in the room. Bernard Madoff wasn't some flashy Wall Street showman. He wasn't charismatic in any obvious way. He was quiet, measured. He wore conservative suits, sat on regulatory boards. He also helped write the rules that governed his own industry. He was, by every external measure, one of the most respected figures in American finance. He founded his own broker-dealer firm in 1960 with $5,000 he'd saved from working as a lifeguard and installing sprinkler systems. Only $5,000. He built it into one of the most powerful trading operations on Wall Street. He helped pioneer electronic trading, the technology that eventually became NASDAQ. He served 3 terms as chairman of NASDAQ. He was friends with SEC regulators. He was trusted by everyone. And alongside all of that, quietly, separately, in a different office on a different floor of his building, he was running a completely fake investment fund. 2 operations, same building, same name. One legitimate, one the biggest fraud in history. And for 30 years, almost nobody knew the second one even existed. Here's the thing that keeps pulling me back to this story. Bernie Madoff wasn't hiding. He wasn't offshore. He wasn't anonymous. He was on every committee, at every gala, in every newspaper. The fraud was conducted in plain sight, just in a part of the building nobody was invited to visit. And the audacity of doing it while being completely visible, is itself a psychological weapon. It's called regulatory capture. The idea that if you're involved enough in the system, you become the system, and systems don't investigate themselves. Here's how a Ponzi scheme works. You take money from investor A and promise them returns. Then you take money from investor B and use it to pay investor A. Then investor C pays investor B, and so on. The scheme survives as long as new money keeps coming in faster than old investors want their money out. Madoff's version was elegant in its simplicity. He claimed to use a strategy called split strike conversion, buying blue-chip stocks and hedging them with options. It was a real strategy, legitimate. The kind of thing that sounds complicated enough that most people nod along without asking follow-up questions. The returns he promised weren't insane. That's what made it believable. He wasn't promising 500%. He was promising 10 to 12% a year. Consistent, steady, boring. While the rest of the market was volatile, up 40% one year, down 30% the next, Madoff was delivering 10 to 12% every single year, without fail. That kind of consistency is what should have been the red flag. Markets don't work like that. No strategy produces perfectly smooth returns year after year through crashes, recessions, and global crises. But the investors who noticed this pattern didn't think something was wrong. They thought Madoff had cracked it. They thought he was just that good. The consistency was the con. Most financial scams attract attention because the returns are too good. Madoff's genius, if you can call it that, was making the returns just good enough to be plausible and just consistent enough to be addictive. Once you've had 10 to 12% every year for 5 years, you don't pull your money. You put more in, and you tell your friends, and they tell their friends. And suddenly, Madoff isn't even recruiting clients. The clients are recruiting each other. He'd created a machine where the victims did the selling for him. Here's where it gets psychologically interesting. Madoff didn't let just anyone invest with him. If you wanted in, You had to be referred by an existing investor. You couldn't cold call his office and ask to open an account. There was no advertising, no website, no sales pitch. You had to know someone. And even then, even with a referral, he might say no. He turned people away, regularly, deliberately. He called it his fund. His clients called it the club. Think about what that does to human psychology. When access is restricted, we don't think, is this restricted because it's fraudulent? We think, how do I get in? The scarcity created desire. The exclusivity created status. Being a Madoff investor wasn't just a financial decision. It was a social signal. It meant you were the kind of person who had those types of connections, who moved in those circles. Prominent charities put their entire endowments in. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel's foundation lost $15 million. Steven Spielberg's charitable foundation was a client. Fred Wilpon, owner of the New York Mets, was in so deep that Madoff's collapse nearly took the entire baseball team with it. None of them demanded independent audits. None of them questioned the consistency of the returns. Because questioning Madoff meant questioning your own judgment for getting in. Here's the interesting part. Madoff wasn't uncatchable. A financial analyst named Harry Markopolos figured out the fraud in 4 hours. 4 hours, with Madoff's publicly available returns data. He submitted a detailed report to the SEC in 2000, then again in 2001, then in 2005, then in 2007. He called it, specifically, explicitly, a Ponzi scheme. He named Madoff. He showed his maths. The SEC did nothing. Why? Because Madoff was too connected, too well respected. The SEC's own investigators were intimidated by his reputation. They interviewed him and accepted his explanations without verifying a single one. The regulator tasked with catching fraud had been so thoroughly captured by the idea of who Bernie Madoff was that it couldn't see what he was doing. Madoff wasn't brought down by investigators. He was brought down by the 2008 financial crisis. When markets collapsed and investors needed their money back, there was no money to give them. He confessed to his sons in December 2008. They called the FBI. He was arrested the next morning. 30 years, $65 billion, ended by a market crash and a phone call from his own children. So what do you actually take from this? Not just the story, the tactics. Madoff exploited 3 things simultaneously. First is authority bias. He'd spent decades building legitimate credibility, former NASDAQ chairman, regulatory board member. When someone with that profile tells you something is safe, your brain doesn't question it. It files it under already verified. Second, exclusivity bias. Making the fund hard to access created the illusion that getting in was an achievement. That itself became a psychological barrier to leaving. How do you admit you were scammed if being in the fund was what made you feel successful? And finally, consistency bias. Once we've seen something work reliably, whether it's a person, a product, or an investment, our brain stops reevaluating it. We use past performance as a proxy for future trustworthiness. 10 years of smooth returns doesn't just make you trust the returns. It makes you trust the person behind them, completely, without maintenance. Combine those 3. Authority tells you this person is safe. Exclusivity tells you being here is an achievement. Consistency tells you questioning is unnecessary. Together, they don't just lower your guard, they remove it entirely. What I want you to sit with is this. Harry Markopolos, 1 person, 4 hours. Publicly available data, saw it immediately. The SEC, a regulatory body with 100 investigators and subpoena power, missed it for 8 years. That's not about intelligence, it's about proximity. The further you are from something, the clearer you can see it. The deeper inside something you are, the harder it is to question it. That's not a flaw in how the SEC works. That's a flaw in how human perception works. And it applies to every investment you've ever made, every authority figure you've ever trusted, and every club you've ever wanted to be part of. Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison. He died there in 2021, aged 82. But the number that haunts me isn't 65 billion. It's this one. Madoff had approximately 37,000 victims. Individuals, families, charities. People who'd worked their whole lives and trusted their retirement savings to him. Charities that had to close because their entire endowment was gone. People who lost everything at 70 years old with no ability to start again. His son Mark committed suicide 2 years after the arrest. His other son Andrew died of cancer, estranged from his father. His wife Ruth lost almost everything in civil suits. His brother Peter served 10 years in prison. The fraud destroyed not just the people it targeted, it destroyed the man who ran it from the inside out. And somewhere right now, someone is running the same scheme. Smaller scale, different packaging, same psychology, same 3 weapons: authority, exclusivity, consistency. If you see all 3 in one place, pointing at one person, demanding your trust, that's your signal. That's exactly where the question should be loudest. That's the anatomy of $65 billion worth of lies.